Few weeks ago, my entire world flipped upside down. I found out my wife, Emily, was cheating on me. And the worst part, I wasn't even looking for it. It all started on an ordinary evening. I came home from work a little later than usual. Emily was in the shower and her laptop was sitting open on the kitchen table. Normally, I wouldn't even think about looking at it, her work, her space, her privacy. I'd always trusted her completely. But as I walked by, the notification popped up on the screen. A message. It read, "I miss you. When will I see you?" I froze. For a moment, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. Who was Mark? The name wasn't familiar, and it wasn't the kind of message you send to a casual friend or coworker. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I leaned closer to the screen, hoping, praying that it was some sort of misunderstanding. Maybe it was from one of her friends joking around. Maybe I was reading it wrong? But deep down, I already knew. There was no joke here, no misunderstanding. The words were clear and they felt like a punch to the gut. I sat down at the table, staring at the laptop like it was going to give me more answers. Part of me wanted to open it, to dig through her messages and find out everything. But another part of me was terrified of what I might find. What if there were more messages like this? What if the betrayal was deeper than I can imagine? By the time Emily came out of the shower, I had closed the laptop and put it back exactly where it was. She walked into the kitchen, smiling, towel drying her hair like nothing had happened. "Hey," she said casually, opening the fridge. "How was your day?" I forced a smile, my chest tightening. "It was fine," I lied, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to throw the message in her face and demand an explanation. But something stopped me. Maybe it was shock, or maybe it was anger. Anger at myself for not noticing sooner, anger at her for betraying me. But mostly, I think it was the need to understand. If Emily was lying to me, I wanted to know how deep those lies went. I wanted to see just how far she was willing to go to keep me in the dark. So I decided to wait, to watch, to observe. I wasn't ready to confront her yet, but I also wasn't ready to let this slide. And I needed to see the truth for myself. And that was the moment everything changed. After that night, I couldn't look at Emily the same way. Every smile she gave me, every casual "I love you" felt fake, like it was part of some elaborate performance. But I didn't let her see that I was suspicious. If she thought everything was normal, she wouldn't change her behavior, and I needed to see how far this went. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Over the next few days, I started noticing things I hadn't before, or maybe I had ignored them. Emily was staying late at work more often, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. When I'd ask her what was keeping her, her answers were vague. Just some last-minute deadlines, she'd say, flashing that same practiced smile. "You know how it is." I nodded, pretending to believe her. "Of course," I'd reply. But inside, I was keeping track. One evening, she came home later than usual. Her hair was slightly messy and there was a faint hint of perfume that wasn't hers. I asked her how her day had been, trying to sound casual. "Exhausting," she said, rolling her eyes as she kicked off her shoes. "I've been dealing with Karen from accounting all day. She's the worst." It was a convincing story. Almost too convincing. But then her phone buzzed. I noticed how quickly she grabbed it, how she turned her body slightly so I couldn't see the screen. Her smile faded for just a second before she tapped out a quick reply and put the phone back in her pocket. "Who was that?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Oh, just work," she said, brushing it off. "They're asking about tomorrow's meeting." I nodded, but I didn't believe her. Something about the way she clutched that phone, the way her voice got just a little too high when she answered, told me there was more to the story. It wasn't just the phone. She was suddenly obsessed with it, carrying it with her everywhere. She even started taking it into the bathroom, something she'd never done before. One night, as we were sitting on the couch watching a movie, I saw her unlock it out of the corner of my eye. She quickly scrolled through something, smiled faintly, and locked it again. I didn't say anything. Instead, I started keeping mental notes. Every late night, every hurried text, every too perfect excuse. The pieces were starting to come together, and they painted a picture I didn't want to see. The worst part was how convincing she was. If I hadn't seen that message on her laptop, I probably wouldn't have noticed any of it. Emily was good at lying, and I realized that she'd probably been doing it for a while, but I couldn't help but wonder how many times I'd missed the signs, how many times she'd looked me in the eye and lied to my face. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. I needed more than just suspicions. I needed proof. But the more I watched her, the more I realized that this wasn't just about infidelity. This was about control. If she could lie to me so easily, what else was she hiding? By now I knew Emily was lying. I just didn't know how deep the lies went or how long it had been happening. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to throw everything on the table and demand answers, but I held back. Something about her confidence, the ease with which she brushed off my questions, made me realize that confronting her wouldn't do any good. Not yet. If Emily could lie to me so effortlessly, why couldn't I use it to my advantage? Instead of storming out of the relationship, I decided to take a different approach. I wanted to see how far her guilt and manipulation skills could go, and if I could use them for my own benefit. My plan was simple: test her loyalty not to me as her husband, but as someone she'd wronged and needed to make things right with. If she was going to lie, I'd make her lies work for me. I wasn't going to be a victim in this. Not anymore. The first thing I did was act like everything was normal. If she thought she was in the clear, she'd let her guard down. I told her I'd been feeling stressed at work and needed her help with a few things outside of her usual responsibilities. She seemed surprised at first, but didn't question it. One day, I brought up our neighbor, John. John and I had a bit of history. He owed me a small sum of money from a favor I'd done for him months ago, and he'd been avoiding me ever since. Emily always rolled her eyes when I brought it up, claiming it wasn't worth the trouble. "Do me a favor," I said one evening while we were having dinner. "Can you talk to John about the money he owes me? You're good at convincing people. Maybe he'll listen to you." Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Why me?" she asked, frowning. "That's your problem, not mine." "You're persuasive," I said, forcing a smile. "You've always been able to talk people into anything. I thought maybe you could help me out." She hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. "Fine, but don't expect miracles." A few days later, she came back with the money in hand. "John paid up," she said casually, tossing the envelope onto the table. I stared at her, genuinely impressed. "Really? How did you do it?" She smirked. "All problems are solved by talking," she said cryptically, and then she walked off like it was no big deal. That was the first step in my plan. Emily didn't realize it, but her willingness to play along, to use her charm and manipulation skills, was giving me exactly what I needed. If she was going to act like this perfect problem solver, I was going to let her. Until I didn't need her anymore. After Emily's success with John, I realized just how effective she could be when she wanted to. Her confidence, her ability to spin words and charm people, it all came naturally to her. She didn't even seem to question why I'd asked her to handle something that wasn't her responsibility. That gave me an idea. If she wanted to play games, I'd give her a few of my own. The next task was a little more complicated. I had been negotiating a deal with a business partner, Greg, for months. It was a big contract that could significantly benefit me if I could get Greg to agree to more favorable terms. The problem was, Greg was stubborn and had been holding firm on his conditions. One evening, I brought it up casually. "Emily, I need your help with something," I said while we were watching TV. She glanced at me suspiciously. "What is it now?" "I need you to talk to Greg. He's my business partner, and I think if you put that charm of yours to good use, you could convince him to sign the deal I'm offering." She raised an eyebrow. "Why can't you do it? Isn't that your job?" "You're better at convincing people," I said, keeping my tone light. "Come on, you worked wonders with John. This should be easy for you." First, she protested. "I don't know Greg. Why would he listen to me?" But I pushed back, appealing to her pride. "You're always saying how you can talk anyone into anything. Prove it." That did the trick. She rolled her eyes, but eventually agreed. A few days later, she came back from meeting Greg. She tossed a signed contract onto the table with a smug grin. "There. Happy now?" I picked up the contract and scanned it. She'd done it. Greg had agreed to the terms I'd been pushing for all along. "How did you manage this?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Oh, Greg's easy to handle," she said with a shrug. "I just made him think it was his idea. Men are so predictable." Her answer made my stomach turn. She was so proud of herself, so smug about how easily she could manipulate people. But I kept my expression neutral, pretending to be impressed. "You're amazing," I said, forcing a smile. "I couldn't have done it without you." Inside, I felt a mix of satisfaction and disgust. She thought she was helping me out of the goodness of her heart, but I knew better. Her guilt over Mark, over the lies she was keeping from me, was driving her to do whatever I asked without question. And I wasn't going to stop there. The more she played along, the more I saw just how far she was willing to go to cover up her betrayal. But this wasn't about getting even. Not yet. This was about making her realize that her lies had consequences, and I was just getting started. After her success with Greg, I knew it was time to raise the stakes. Emily's ability to manipulate people was undeniable, and she seemed almost eager to prove herself useful. I wanted to see just how far her guilt and her talents would take her. If she thought she could lie and charm her way through life, I was going to put that to the test. One evening over dinner, I brought up the idea. "Emily, I've got another favor to ask," I said casually, cutting into my steak. And she sighed and leaned back in her chair. "Another one? What now?" I took a sip of my wine, letting the silence linger for a moment before answering. "There's this guy, Steven. He's been holding back on a deal I need to close. He's hesitant, and I think you'd be the perfect person to convince him." Her fork clattered against her plate. "Jake, come on. I'm not your business partner. This is your job, not mine." "You're right," I said, nodding. "But you're better at this than I am. You've got this way of making people trust you. And besides, you've already proven you can handle situations like this." She narrowed her eyes, clearly annoyed. "Why do I feel like you're taking advantage of me?" "Because I am," I said with a grin, keeping my tone playful. "But seriously, Emily, I need your help. Just this one last time." She stared at me for a long moment before finally relenting. "Fine, but you owe me for this." The next day, she arranged to meet Steven for lunch. I made sure to stay out of the way, letting her work her magic. When she came home that evening, she was practically glowing with self-satisfaction. "Well?" I asked, feigning curiosity as I sat on the couch. She tossed a signed agreement onto the coffee table. "Done," she said with a smirk. "Steven's all yours. Honestly, he wasn't that hard to convince." Picked up the document, scanning it quickly. She'd pull it off again. Steven had agreed to terms I thought were impossible. I looked up at her, keeping my expression neutral. "How'd you manage this?" She shrugged, her smirk widening. "Let's just say Steven needed a little encouragement. Men are so easy to read." Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I nodded and smiled. "You're incredible, Emily. I don't know how you do it." She preened under the compliment, clearly enjoying the praise. But inside, I was seething. Her arrogance, her willingness to manipulate, her complete lack of remorse. It was infuriating. She thought she was saving our marriage, redeeming herself for whatever guilt she carried about Mark. But all she was doing was proving how far she was willing to go to get what she wanted. Brant, this wasn't just a test of her abilities, it was a test of her character. And every time she succeeded, she failed in ways she didn't even realize. She was digging her own grave, and she didn't even see it. By now, Emily had fully stepped into the role I'd quietly crafted for her. She thought she was proving her loyalty to me, making up for whatever guilt she felt over her affair with Mark. What she didn't realize was that every task I gave her wasn't about fixing our marriage. It was about exposing just how easily she lied and manipulated her way through life. After the success with Steven, I started assigning her more favors. It became almost routine. She didn't question it anymore. She simply did what I asked, probably thinking it would keep me happy and keep me from suspecting anything. One of the more notable instances was when I asked her to handle a sticky situation with a vendor I'd been having trouble with. The guy was a real hard ass, refusing to budge on a pricing issue that was costing me money. I casually mentioned it to Emily over breakfast one morning, watching her reaction closely. You're good at smoothing things over," I said, buttering my toast. "Think you could talk to him? Maybe get him to see reason?" She sighed, her irritation clear, but she agreed. "Fine, but you owe me, Jake. I'm not your personal fixer." That afternoon, she met with the vendor and managed to renegotiate the terms in my favor. When she came back, she acted like it was no big deal, brushing it off with a casual wave of her hand. "See, problem solved," she said, dropping the updated agreement on the table. Every success like that only reinforced her arrogance. She thought she was some master negotiator, some savior of our relationship, but I could see through her. This wasn't about saving our marriage, it was about saving herself. Her guilt over Mark had turned her into a puppet, and I was pulling the strings. What struck me most was how seamlessly she lied. Whether it was to me, to Greg, to Steven, or to the vendor, she delivered every word with confidence and conviction. It was unsettling, to say the least. How many times had she lied to me before? How many times had I fallen for that same tone, that same look in her eyes? Her lies started to bleed into every part of our lives. When friends asked about her new projects, she spun elaborate stories to explain why she was so busy. When family asked why we weren't spending more time together, she blamed my work schedule. It was like she'd become addicted to the act of deception, unable to stop herself even when it wasn't necessary. But the more she lied, the more I saw through her. Every smile, every excuse, every carefully crafted story, it was all an act. And the longer it went on, the more I realized that the woman I thought I loved was nothing more than a facade. I wasn't ready to confront her just yet. Not until I had everything lined up. But the chain of deception was tightening around her, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. It was time to pull the rug out from under her. Emily had been playing her role perfectly. Oblivious to the fact that I knew about Mark, about the lies, about everything, she thought she was in control, using her charm and manipulation to keep our marriage intact. But what she didn't realize was that every step she took was leading her closer to the trap I'd been carefully setting. One evening, I decided it was time to tip my hand. I lasted a photo I'd found on her phone, the one of her and Mark at a cozy-looking restaurant on the dining table. I printed it out large enough that she couldn't miss it and left it right where I knew she'd see it when she got home. When she walked in, I was sitting on the couch casually scrolling through my phone. I didn't even look up as she set her purse down and noticed the photo. Her footsteps faltered, and then there was silence. I could practically hear her heart pounding. "Jake," she said, her voice shaky, "what is this?" I finally looked up, meeting her wide-eyed stare. "You tell me," I said, coolly, gesturing toward the photo. "You seem to know him pretty well." Her face turned ghostly pale. For a moment, she just stood there, clutching the back of a chair like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Then, like clockwork, the excuses started pouring out. "It's not what it looks like," she said, her voice trembling. "Mark's just a friend. We were having lunch. It's completely innocent." I let out a bitter laugh. "Innocent? Emily, don't insult me. I've seen the messages. I know what's been going on." Her jaw dropped, and for a split second, I saw real fear in her eyes. But then, her expression hardened. "You've been spying on me?" she snapped, trying to turn the tables. "That's such a violation of my privacy." "You're kidding, right?" I shot back, my voice rising. "You've been cheating on me, lying to my face for months, and you're mad at me for finding out? Give me a break." She tried to say something else, but I cut her off. "I've let this go on long enough, Emily. I've known about Mark from the start. Every late night at work, every secret text, every pathetic excuse, I've seen through it all. And you know what? I've been letting you dig your own grave." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. She wasn't crying because she felt guilty. She was crying because she'd been caught. "Jake, please," she whispered. "I made a mistake. I didn't mean for it to happen. I can fix this." I stood up, towering over her. "Fix it? You think you can fix this? Emily, I let you manipulate people, lie for me, jump through hoops, all to show you what a life built on deception feels like. How does it feel now, knowing you've been used the same way you used me?" She broke down, sobbing into her hands, but I didn't stay to comfort her. Instead, I grabbed my keys and walked out the door. I didn't slam it, didn't yell. I just left her there with her guilt, her lies, and the mess she'd made of our marriage. The next morning, I returned home to find Emily sitting at the dining table. Her eyes were bloodshot, her hair disheveled, and the photo I had left was still lying in front of her. She looked up when I walked in, her face a mix of anger and desperation. "We need to talk," she said firmly, her voice hoarse from crying. I set my keys on the counter and leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. "Go ahead," I said, my tone cold. "Talk." She took a deep breath, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "I made a mistake, Jake. I know I hurt you, but it wasn't like that with Mark. It wasn't about love or even sex. It was just an escape." "An escape?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "From what, Emily? From me? From our life together? Do you even hear how pathetic that sounds?" She flinched, but I didn't care. I wasn't about to let her manipulate me with her tears. "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "I was lonely. You were always busy with work, always distracted. I didn't feel seen. And Mark, he made me feel important again." Mark, I let out a bitter laugh. "So this is my fault now? Classic. You cheat on me, lie to my face, and somehow I'm the bad guy because I was working to support us? Do you even hear yourself?" She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not blaming you," she shouted, her composure cracking. "I'm just trying to explain." "Explain what, Emily?" I interrupted, my voice rising. That you're a liar? That you've been lying to me, to yourself, to everyone? Do you even know what the truth is anymore?" Her tears started again, but they didn't move me. Jake, please, she begged, stepping closer. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just don't give up on us. I shook my head, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. You don't get it, do you? There is no us anymore. You destroyed that the moment you decided Mark was worth risking everything we built. And you know what the worst part is? It's not even about the cheating. It's about the lies. The constant, shameless lies. She reached out, her hand trembling, but I stepped back. Don't, I said, my voice low. Don't touch me. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, she looked genuinely defeated, like she realized there was nothing she could say to undo the damage. I didn't feel triumph or satisfaction, just an overwhelming sense of relief that I was finally putting an end to this nightmare. I'll be filing for divorce, I said, breaking the silence. You can keep the house. I don't want anything from you except my freedom. Her face crumpled, and she collapsed into the chair, sobbing uncontrollably. But I didn't stay to watch. I grabbed my bag, walked out the door, and didn't look back. Filing for divorce was both the hardest and easiest decision I've ever made. Hard because it meant officially ending what I once believed would last forever, and easy because there was no trust left to salvage. The process itself was a blur. Paperwork, lawyers, endless questions about assets and logistics. But through it all, I felt a growing sense of freedom, like a weight had finally been lifted off my chest. Emily didn't take it well. She called me constantly, leaving voicemails, begging me to reconsider. We can fix this, Jake, she said in one. I know I messed up, but don't throw everything away over one mistake. One mistake. That phrase made my blood boil every time I heard it. Her affair with Mark wasn't a single slip-up. It was a series of calculated lies, repeated choices to betray me, and countless opportunities to come clean that she ignored. Our mistake was her way of minimizing everything she'd done, and I wasn't falling for it. The hardest part was dealing with the fallout from our mutual friends. Emily, true to form, spun her own version of the story, painting herself as the victim of a cold, unfeeling husband who worked too much and neglected her emotional needs. For a while, it felt like half the people in our lives were against me, buying into her narrative without ever asking for my side. But then the truth started to come out. People began to hear whispers about Mark, about the messages, about the photo I'd left on the table. One by one, friends who had sided with Emily started to distance themselves from her. By the time the divorce was finalized, she'd lost not just her marriage, but her reputation as well. Emily, I didn't gloat or take any satisfaction in her downfall. I wasn't interested in revenge, just closure. But Emily didn't see it that way. She blamed me for everything. Her ruined friendships, her tarnished image, even her own guilt. You're punishing me, she said during one of our final conversations. You're trying to ruin my life. No, Emily, I replied, my voice calm but firm. You ruined your life the moment you decided that lying was easier than being honest. All I did was refuse to keep living in your fantasy. She didn't have a response to that. For once, she was silent. As I signed the final papers, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Grief for what we'd lost, anger at how it had ended, but also relief. I was free from her lies, her manipulation, her constant need to control the narrative. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. I walked out of the courthouse that day and didn't look back. The chapter with Emily was closed, and I was ready to start writing a new one. Pretty good chunk of the day where I don't hear from anybody. It's been a few months since the divorce was finalized, and for the first time in years, I feel like I'm living for myself again. The house, with all its memories, good and bad, is behind me now. I've moved into a smaller apartment downtown, and while it's not much, it feels like home. A place where I can start over. Rebuilding hasn't been easy. At first, the silence was unbearable. I'd wake up in the middle of the night expecting to hear Emily's voice or the sound of her footsteps, only to remember she was gone. But over time, I learned to embrace the quiet. It became a reminder that I was free from her lies, her manipulation, and the constant weight of distrust. I've thrown myself into my work, taking on projects that challenge me and remind me of what I'm capable of. I've also started reconnecting with old friends, the ones Emily had slowly pushed out of my life. They welcomed me back without judgment, and their support has been invaluable. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Tell me what you think about that story. Have a good day, and bye.